From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Pediatrics Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinions featured in JAMA Pediatrics.
Hello again, podcast listeners. This is Dimitri Christakis, Editor-in-Chief of JAMA Pediatrics, the top pediatric journal in the world this year. Joining me, as always, is my close friend, colleague, and associate editor, Dr. Alison Galbraith. Hi, Allie. How are you doing?
Hi, good.
And we use an article from JAMA that we recently published from JAMA Pediatrics as a springboard to have a broader discussion with an international expert on a particular topic. And today, we're very, very fortunate to have Dr. Meg Parker joining us. Dr. Parker is the Academic Chief of Neonatology at the UMass Chan School of Medicine. Welcome, Meg.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for coming. All right, Allie, tell us what made us think of Dr. Meg Parker for this particular podcast.
Yeah, so we are publishing a paper. The paper is entitled Conditional and Unconditional Cash Transfers, Early Life Nutrition and Child Growth, a Randomized Controlled Trial. It's by Wallenborn and colleagues from the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute and the Lao Tropical and Public Health Institute. So what they wanted to do was to see if conditional or unconditional cash transfers could be a strategy to increase rates of exclusive breastfeeding and child growth, because as we know, breastfeeding rates are suboptimal. And so first, just to say that a conditional cash transfer is a payment that's given for meeting certain conditions, like in this case, for exclusively breastfeeding for 6 months, or, for example, getting vaccinated or something like that. Whereas an unconditional cash transfer is a payment that's given without conditions or requirements, with the idea that people will know what they need to spend their money on. So in this case, the authors thought that because there are financial constraints faced by breastfeeding mothers, and that might be a factor for suboptimal breastfeeding rates, they thought that cash or in-kind transfers could be promising as a way to stimulate breastfeeding and improving growth and health in developing countries. So this study took place in the Lao People's Democratic Republic in 2022 to 2023. It was a 3-arm randomized controlled trial. So the mothers were randomized to either receive a conditional social transfer, which meant that they could choose a cash equivalent of $75 or the equivalent in toys or clothes or diapers, or a combination. And they received that only if they were still exclusively breastfeeding at 6 months. The unconditional arm received the same choices for cash equivalent of $75 or toys or diapers that they could receive at 6 months postpartum, regardless of whether they were breastfeeding. And then a control group received educational materials only. The primary outcome was the proportion of mothers who were exclusively breastfeeding at 6 months postpartum. And then there were secondary outcomes, including some child growth outcomes. So they enrolled 298 mothers, and they found that the group that received the conditional social transfers had significantly greater odds of exclusive breastfeeding at 6 months compared to the controls. And also, the unconditional social transfer group had significantly greater odds of exclusive breastfeeding at 6 months compared to controls. However, the odds ratio for the conditional group was higher than the odds for the unconditional transfer group. And there were no significant differences in growth at 6 months. So their conclusion was that social transfers can improve exclusive breastfeeding at 6 months, especially with conditional transfers.
So I think you brought up a really important point. I actually had the same thought that typically when you want to sort of incentivize a behavior, that in this case for breastfeeding, you're saying the main reason mothers need more money with breastfeeding is to help them with the actual breastfeeding. To me, it would have made more sense to give it upfront or give it ongoing until you hit the goal of 6 months rather than to give it at that point. I actually wonder if that might have been part of the reason why they saw a bigger impact on the conditional one, right? Because they knew they really had to hit that mark, whereas unconditional didn't necessarily need to be. Rather, if they had given it along the way, like at monthly intervals, perhaps they would have had a different result. But I had a very similar thought about that. The way they give it didn't completely align to me with the mechanism that they were trying to accomplish or the goal they were trying to support.
I was surprised because you read stuff about like Esther Duflo and the Nobel Prize that she got advocating for unconditional cash transfer, saying that people really know what they can do or should do with the transfer, the cash. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about conditional versus unconditional in different settings than this?
The way you describe the definitions up front are absolutely what they are. A conditional transfer is you give the cash only if they meet a certain condition. So the pro in that case is, again, you're aligning what you want directly with what you're asking the participant or family or whatever it is to do for you. The downside of that is it's administratively a lot more burdensome at times. The other big downside is that it can be viewed as coercive and sort of taking away from autonomy potentially from the family. Whereas the unconditional one is more supportive. The family knows what they need to do to sort of achieve the goal that you want. And there have been studies definitely showing in other settings that unconditional cash transfers can be as effective as conditional ones. This study that we just saw didn't see that, but certainly there's other studies out there looking at education in developing countries or participation in health visits or a whole array of other things where you are seeing somewhat similar findings with the unconditional transfers.
Well, can I ask a question about that? Because to me, one of the issues is, what's the measure of exclusive breastfeeding? Is it not based on parental report?
Are you alluding to the fact that it's possible their measure at 6 months, so they asked for exclusive breastfeeding, it wasn't like they observed the woman for a full day to watch her do it? I sort of had a similar thought too. Like, I don't know what they said.
Yeah, I mean, we usually think of exclusive breastfeeding as there's no other way to do it except to basically ask the mother, are you exclusively breastfeeding? And if you're conditionally incentivizing her on that report, it's not surprising when you get a larger effect size. If for no other reason, she might be prone to exaggerate for the incentive.
Yeah, I don't know how they exactly collected their measure. My guess is I'm certain they didn't observe the baby feeding only breast milk for that day, but I actually had a similar thought about how they did that.
But that's what's hard about conditional things if you really wanted to verify, right?
And that's why I think people view them as administratively just more burdensome. One key piece actually that hasn't been mentioned, which I should say, is that there's this other concept of something called a labeled unconditional cash transfer, where they told the mother when she enrolled, this money is supposed to be used for you to help with breastfeeding your baby. So you provide the goal intention that you want the person to do with that fund. So that is another piece that people layer on to these unconditional cash transfers to provide the reason to the family why you're doing it. And they did do that in this case.
But you could still use it for something else, even though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think the assumption is that the money is somewhat fungible, because if you bought toys too, or you took toys or diapers, those don't directly support breastfeeding, but presumably they free up other assets, offset. I guess the question I have also, Meg, about how you set these goals or how you set these transfers is the idea that you come up with an amount that is thought to be kind of cost effective from a societal perspective, or you just decide we want to motivate this behavior and let's figure out how much it needs to be.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you're asking about what's the dose of cash? So certainly in the US, there's many fewer of these cash transfer studies that have occurred compared to the developing world thus far, particularly around in pediatrics and in newborn health. These are just sort of beginning to emerge. I think in the US, you have to think about a few things. The first is you want the dose of the cash to be something hopefully in the future that would be replicable. So you don't want to pick a dose that's so high that you think that would never happen from a policy perspective. On the flip side, you also want to pick something you think is meaningful for whatever outcome you're actually trying to achieve. So certainly there's going to be variability depending on what you want the person to do, whether it's breastfeed for 6 months, or like in my case, it's go to the NICU every week to see their baby multiple times. So you have to also think about that.
Tell us about your study, because you just alluded to it, and that's one of the reasons you're here. We'd introduce you that way. Don't tell us your findings. You'll publish those in JAMA Pediatrics someday. But between now and then, tell us what you're doing.
Well, we would be thrilled to publish our results in JAMA Pediatrics someday. I'll definitely tell you a little bit about how that study is designed. In our trial, we're at 420 mothers, low-income mothers that are Medicaid eligible. That's how we seek that. And they will receive $160 per week while their baby is hospitalized in the NICU versus usual care. And we're using a labeled unconditional cash transfer approach where when they receive into that group, they get this message that says, please use this money for anything you need to do to come visit your baby in the NICU and breastfeed and do skin to skin. And our two main outcomes are breastfeeding and skin to skin. And when they get the cash, they give it weekly on a debit-like card. It's called the Cuddle card. So that's actually another part of the message, is because we want to encourage their engagement in caregiving activities. And for us, we picked $160 a week because that equates to approximately a SNAP benefit for a family of 4. So that's how we anchored it. We don't know if this is going to be the correct dose, if you will, but it was like a proof of concept. We had to start with something. And we certainly didn't have enough money to have like the high dose, the low dose, and the control group. Like we only had so much. So this is our first approach thus far. And then getting back to your other question, another really important thing to think about with doses of cash is the worry that if you give too much cash, a family may lose access to other benefits. So this is a big deal for our study, and I think for anybody thinking about cash transfer studies in any capacity, particularly in the US, because so many of the different types of benefits families get are based in part on income. So WIC, SNAP, TANF, like just a whole array of different things to consider. The one thing to really think about, though, with these cash transfers we give mothers is that they're a gift. They're not like income. So technically, they don't need to report them as income. And we advise them not to. But there's still always concerns when people are going to get their benefits for various reasons. They're asking not just for income, but other sources of money that families get in the household. So in our study and in others that I've heard about in the US that are doing this type of cash transfer work, is part of our enrollment procedures have very detailed counseling to mothers about risks that they may have if they get this cash. And in our study, actually, we're in Massachusetts and in Georgia, we've actually obtained some waivers for some particular types of benefits programs to make sure that families that enroll in our study are not going to lose those. So that's been just part of our legwork up front. We've been working with various public health benefit lawyer folks, which have been great members of our team. So that's a little bit about our study. We're about 30 people enrolled so far, and we just give our cash transfers during the NICU period only. In our study, we are really trying to focus on this time when mothers are really struggling with the back and forth, the mother-infant separation that occurs during the NICU stay that is really expensive, right? The transportation, parking, food, at a time when they're not working because they weren't expected to be working then. So they're losing all this income. So it's really meant to sort of offset this more short-term financial distress that a family may receive in the NICU. So that's our particular one.
Who would pay for it? I mean, going forward.
I'll let Alison answer first.
Well, I was thinking about this, we do unconditional cash transfers. Like we have the child tax credit, I guess you could think of like that, or the COVID relief, right? And so that was very acceptable to people. But I could imagine there are some people who would object to unconditional cash transfers because they're like, oh, you're going to go spend money on alcohol. So how do you deal with that?
We're doing that in a couple ways. The first of all is just know that the research that has come out is not showing that that's the case.
Right.
And the research that has come out and showed, our work was based on this pilot. And like the pilot, we're actually tracking what the moms are using the cuddle card for. I can tell you, I actually looked last week and lo and behold, they're spending it on food and transportation predominantly. Sometimes they're getting out cash as well. But I think this is an absolute belief and worry that people have is that people are going to go and spend it on drugs and alcohol or just the other things that aren't for what that family needs to spend it on. Just continuing to show people the data that we have. We feel glad that in our study, we're actually going to have to be able to track the transactions. I hope that that's helpful to our research community and policy community when we see that too.
Thank you so much, Meg. This was very, very interesting and different, and for our listeners to think about, the extent to which this is something we could generalize as a way of improving public health. Thanks for your work. I look forward to seeing your published paper someday in JAMA Pediatrics, hopefully.
Well, that would be great. We're a few years away because we're just starting enrollment, but we're looking forward to it.
This episode was produced by Shelley Steffens. A link to the JAMA Pediatrics content can be found in the episode's show notes. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com. And thank you for listening.